There's just a couple more things I want to mention about smart contracts, and then we'll start to write our own. In this video, I want to talk about the programming language that we're going to use to write the actual code that gets inserted into a smart contract. For this, we're going to use a programming language called Solidity. Solidity was invented specifically for authoring smart contracts, and so it has many features inside the language to make the execution of these contracts much easier. Solidity is written into .sol files, and they're compatible with any standard code editor. So I particularly am going to use Atom later on in the course to show you how Solidity is written, but you're free to use any editor that you wish. Solidity is strongly typed, unlike, say, JavaScript, which is dynamically typed. If you've never worked with a strongly typed language before, that's totally fine. I'll give you a very strong refresher or an intro to how strongly typed languages work. Solidity is thought of as being similar to JavaScript. That's kind of a tough one. I personally don't believe it's that much similar. Some of the syntax certainly is similar, and if you're familiar with JavaScript syntax, you're going to have a very good time. But the way in which the language works is sometimes quite a bit different, so just keep that in mind. The last thing I want to mention about Solidity is that it has several very big gotchas. In general, if you're familiar with JavaScript and you're familiar with JavaScript syntax, you're going to be just fine writing Solidity after I teach you about some of these really big gotchas that you need to be aware of. In fact, if you're familiar with JavaScript right now, I could probably give you a list of like 15 big bullet points to be aware of, and you'll probably be quite productive with Solidity in very short order. The last thing I want to mention about Solidity is that the contracts that you and I are going to write and the contracts that are written for actual production applications usually end up being quite small for a variety of reasons. And so it's not quite so necessary to be a complete expert in Solidity, because we're not going to spend days and days and weeks and months writing just Solidity code. Usually we author a contract rather quickly, and then it's actually all the application code that we write around it, like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, that we're going to write to interact with that contract. That's what usually takes the most amount of time. So again, don't be intimidated by Solidity. It's really not going to be a big difficulty hurdle. Now I want to speak a little bit more about how Solidity is used. When you and I write a contract, we're going to write what is called a contract definition using Solidity. Solidity is an actual programming language that is very easy for you and I to read and interact with and understand. But it's not the actual code that is actually executed on the Ethereum network inside of these smart contracts. Instead, we're going to take that contract definition and feed it into a Solidity compiler. This compiler is going to spit out two separate files. The first one is going to contain some bytecode, and this is the actual bytecode that will be deployed to the Ethereum network. So this is the actual stuff that gets stuffed into our contract account. On the other hand, the Solidity compiler is also going to spit out something called the application binary interface, which we are going to refer to as the ABI throughout this entire course. This ABI right here is really key for writing applications that can interact with these deployed smart contracts. Let me give you an example. After we deploy a contract and get an ABI out of it, we're going to eventually write some JavaScript code that will serve as kind of the front end or the actual user interface to our contract. But our JavaScript code has no ability whatsoever to interact with the bytecode that has actually been deployed on the Ethereum blockchain. Remember, that Ethereum blockchain, the smart contract that exists there, it contains some bytecode that was previously Solidity. So you can think of the ABI right here as being an interface of sorts for getting our JavaScript code to understand exactly what's going on with this really strange, crazy looking bytecode down here. And that's what I'm trying to indicate with these crazy little symbols. Essentially, our JavaScript code thinks that this is all gibberish inside of here, and so we need this ABI to do a layer of translation for us. The ABI usually ends up as being something that's very easily legible, like you and I can read the ABI in plain terms, and it actually will give us a really good idea of exactly how we can interact with our contract. And so we will actually read the ABI several times to get a good idea of what functions or different pieces of data we can call and interact with inside of our smart contracts that we have deployed. All right, so that's just a little introduction on Solidity. Let's now take a break, We're going to continue in the next video and start working on our first smart contract. So I'll see you in just a minute.